Hello, 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 everybody. It's Dr. Yolanda. I am so excited to be here today. This is May 6th, and we are celebrating not only Women's History Month, and well, not Women's History Month, I'm sorry. We know that Women's History Month was in March, but Women's Health Month is something that we celebrate in May. But we're also celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month. And I'd like to talk about how the two sort of intersect. Okay. So if you haven't joined the show before, I am so excited to be here with you today because this show, Mind, Body, and Stress with Dr. Yolanda, is all about you. I talk about the ways in which the things that we are doing that are connecting both our bodies physiologically and our minds with our mental health, and the stress that we're experiencing just in our everyday lives are all connected, and how we have to be mindful of those things and what we can do to counteract some of that, how we could be productive and making our lives better and helping not only ourselves, our families, and our communities. So if you are here today, come on in. I think you guys are absolutely the best things ever. And this show is all about you. So ask your questions and make sure that you let somebody else know about the show. Okay. Let me know where you're from, where you're tuning in from. I want to know all about it, and I want to know more about you. So again, we are celebrating both women's health awareness as well as mental health awareness. But I'm going to start with the elephant in the room. You all know that in our current events right now, we are dealing with the backlash, if you will, of this leaked draft that the Supreme Court put out, where they're entertaining revoking Roe v. Wade, right? And we all understand what that really means. Those of us who are Black and brown women, we know that this is going to have the biggest impact on us. And it's so egregious because what this is not about, as many people seem to say, it's only about pro-choice, but it's really about our, getting into this space where you're denying people the opportunity, women, the opportunity to really make decisions for ourselves and govern ourselves. And so this is really something that to be having to deal with this right now in this month, in this month of May, in this year, 2022 is just something that I didn't think we would ever, especially in our lifetimes, have to think of or deal with. But it has been a systematic rollback of many of our rights, especially voting rights in a lot of the states, those southern states. And so this is not something that we are surprised by, but we're definitely disgusted by it. So if you have anything to say, if you're feeling a certain kind of way, you are not by yourselves. We just want to make sure that you all know that we're all fighting the good fight and that we're talking about it and that we're trying to draw attention to it. So again, let's celebrate National Women's Health Month. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about this, but Women's Health Month actually started off as a week of women's health that we used to talk about, and we used to we drew attention to it. And this is, I think it began somewhere. I'm trying to think. I think I wrote this down. I'm not sure exactly when it began, but it was to encourage women and girls to really prioritize their health. And it starts the day of Mother's Day and it runs for a week. But we like to talk about women's health throughout the month. Now, even during COVID, this is really a time where we need to be focusing on our health, right? We're finally getting back out there. We're finally reconnecting. And we want to make sure that you're choosing safe ways to get your exercise in, to get these healthy meals in, to show accountability with each other, have these walking groups, maybe do a couple of things. Maybe for Mother's Day, you'll choose to have a small gathering, but make sure that there's some healthy choices there for your foods that you're eating. And I did want to pull up some things. So when you're talking about protecting your health, you want to identify those things that are important for your needs and for your care. And so the things that you want to bring up, make sure you're having your yearly visits with the physician, nurse practitioner, or nurse. But there are the things that you want to talk about. And what I love, there's there's a website that I looked at for women's health. And it was great because it talked about the different things that you as a woman need to know or be aware of for each decade. So it talks about your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, 60s. And I thought it was excellent. And I'm going to give a little bit of that information. It talks about eating healthy, really understanding, what proteins are, what fats are, what carbohydrates are, what portions look like. Choose some type of an eating plan and stick to it. I'm not here to endorse one over the other. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's keto, there's intermittent fasting, there's paleo, clean eating. There's so much out there. So get the information. But once you make these decisions, just stick to it. Find some people that can do this with you. This is what accountability is about. You want to get at least 30 minutes of exercise in a day. What's the most useful is if you get 2 times of 30 minutes of exercise during the day. It speeds up your metabolism and it burns stubborn fat. You want to drink as much water as you can. I say that in jest when I say as you can, but generally it's half your body weight. That's in pounds and ounces. I tend to drink about a gallon of water a day. You want to get a good adequate amount of sleep. So science says it's between 7 and 9 hours. I personally wouldn't know what to do with 9 hours. I promise you. But I'm generally a 6-hour sleeper. I can function on as little as 4 or 5. But studies say we should get at least 7 hours. A lot of other studies say that as you get older, you actually require less rest for whatever reason. So you'll find that someone may not sleep throughout the night, but they might take a nap or something during the day. That's as you get older. And I say older, I mean above 60. You want to maintain a healthy weight, as we talked about. Find out what you want to do, but what's your weight and what's your height? And is this appropriate for you? And if not, what's the amount of weight that you should weigh? Have this conversation with a medical professional. Okay, a lot of people walking around saying, oh, I want to lose about 10 to 20 pounds. But then they'll find out that they might be a little bit more overweight. And I'm not just talking about BMI. Have the real conversation with your physician or your provider and find out if they really understand weight, because everything is not based on BMI. We've had this conversation. Make sure if you have any habits that you need to kick, that this is the time to do it. If you're still smoking, you want to really think about this because it's affecting your lungs and it definitely is decreasing your lifespan. If you're someone who's drinking alcohol, if you're someone who's doing any kind of drugs that are not necessarily good for your body, this is the time to really think about how you can curb or stop these behaviors, because you really want to engage in what's the healthiest for you and for your bodies. If you're somebody who's riding a bike outside, if you're one of those who rides a bike outside, I want you wearing a helmet, whatever protective gears, wearing your seatbelt. Now, vitamins and supplements. Take a daily vitamin or supplement. I've talked about this. We don't get everything we need in our food. And if you're of childbearing age, you want to make sure you're taking folic acid, anywhere between 400 and 800 milligrams a day, because that is protective. There are some things that happen to the neural tube of a fetus if you don't have enough folic acid in your body. So you definitely want to be doing that. Now, if you're over 50, I'm not going to say who is on the show, but if you're like me and you're over 50, this is a time when you want to start talking to your doctors about menopause symptoms. Again, your weight and your physical activity. This is where you start to see that fluctuation because of what's happening in your hormones. So that's an important time to have this conversation. Make sure that you discuss if you have a family history of things like cancer or diabetes, heart disease, any of that stuff. And I'm going to land here on, you want to have a discussion about things like depression and or anxiety if you're feeling this, because the statistics say that as women we are twice as likely sorry to be diagnosed. I'm not feeling very well, but I'm feeling a little bit better now. It's not COVID, so everybody knows I was tested negative. And I hate summer colds. I had this conversation a minute ago. So if you hear me cough a little bit or sniffle, it's because I'm just getting over a cold. But in terms of depression in women, we are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression than our male counterparts. And there's a lot of reasons that this can be. Much of it is attached to just who we are as women, right? So many times we're the caregivers in our homes. So that means that we're responsible for children, spouses. Sometimes our parents are also in our care. And again, studies will show that those who are the caregivers in their family, they are really responsible for so much more, and what's on their plate tends to take over. They don't get a lot of time to take care of themselves. So they end up suffering from depression and anxiety a lot more. But also, as I said before, when you're getting to a certain age, some of those mood changes and some of the things that you're experiencing, like depression, might be associated with those hormonal changes that you have as you're transitioning into perimenopause or into menopause. Prior to that, again, postpartum, because it's also it deals with hormones and the fluctuation of hormones. There are women who have experienced postpartum depression. And sometimes that depression is prolonged depression. So you definitely want to be evaluated if that happens. But when we're talking about this menopausal depression, a lot of times those levels have to do with the fact that we have such a plummet in our estrogen, okay? That happens, and that can be associated with depression. But here's the other part about this. We're not just dealing with, so I don't want everybody to think, oh, it's because I'm a woman, I'm depressed. Nope, that's not it. I'm saying that there are some things that will make us higher risk for depression when it comes to our hormones. But then there's just the environment that we're in today, right? I just talked about this whole situation with the Roe v. Wade being basically in danger of being reversed. So there's a lot that happens in our environment, the microaggressions and the macroaggressions of, especially as women of color, of both racism as well as sexism that is affecting us physiologically. And these things are contributing to our depression and some of the depression and some of the anxiety that we feel. So not only do we have the micro and macro aggressions and biases of racism, but on top of that, as women, we're experiencing the shift of power, actually the powerlessness that exists in our lives when we are making up for white women 82 cents on the dollar compared to their white counterpart, male counterpart. For Black women with degrees, we're around 70 cents. We earn about 70 cents on the dollar when we compare to the white male that's doing the same job. And then studies say that Black and Hispanic women with a bachelor's degree, not an advanced degree, but a bachelor's degree, can earn as little as 65 cents on the dollar. Who wouldn't have depression and anxiety in their lives when you are stressed out trying to do more, trying to compete in a world where there's these constraints, physical and structural constraints on you? So why wouldn't we feel the pressures? So these are a lot of things that we're dealing with. So I just want to make sure that you all know that we are here to talk about it. It is a connection between mind, body, and stress, and it is not to be ignored. So if you're joining us for the first time, again, I am Dr. Yolanda, and this is Mind, Body, and Stress. And this month, we are celebrating Women's Health Awareness Month, as well as Mental Health Awareness Month. So then we're going to talk a little bit about mental health awareness. I know my partner in crime is on here. Ellis, before I move on, was there anything that you wanted to draw attention to or bring out or chime in on? He always has such poignant things to say, and sometimes even things that I may have forgotten or I may not draw on long enough. So let me make sure that I don't move on into mental health and I didn't say some of the things that is important for our audience to hear about.
No, I think you nailed it, and I think what's important, what I loved about this month, and what you were saying is that, and the fact that we were able to do this on this show, is it's Women's Health Awareness Month and it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and there is a definite overlap between those two because there is a lot of stress that comes from the gender-related stress that comes from even just as you were laying out, making less as their white counterpart for doing the same job, and that adds up over time. The fact that we had to have a constitutional amendment to give women the right to vote, right? Just think about that. There had to be a whole amendment around that from women that are the mothers that keep the nation going. Without women, we would not have this United States. And men are like, nah, you can't vote. We're going to make all the decisions for you.
Well, what's crazy too is even in the beginning of that vote, we weren't involved. We weren't involved in that, right? We were out there in that suffrage movement, but that vote, that right to vote, wasn't for Black women. That right to vote was for white women.
Oh, yeah.
And so what we had to then fight to say, well, wait a minute, we don't just want this vote for white women. We're talking about all women. So it's just so ironic that they keep making these conversations about what the Constitution says, And we all know that the original writers of the Constitution did not mean for people like you and me to be involved in that Constitution, because when they said all men were created equal, they weren't talking about Black men, because Black men weren't considered men.
Right.
Black people weren't considered people. So they were talking about white men, and you see, they purposefully said men because they meant to leave out women. It wasn't, they could have easily said all people are created equal, but they knew for a fact that that's not what they meant. But that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole nother story. And you think about what you said. So when we put in the context, so you're talking about in the context of just women in general. When you put it into the subset of Black women in general, it goes even further. So you say women's suffrage happened, I want to say between 1919 and 1921, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. But think about fast forward, you had to get to the 1960s until the Voting Rights Act was passed and the Civil Rights Acts were passed in order to get Black women the right to have a vote and have a say, a legitimate vote and say in the decisions.
So 50 years.
The decisions that were made about them. So there is an undeniable intersection between women's health and women's mental health. Mm-hmm. And so we have to talk about that. And it's sad that we only have an hour to do it, but you're doing a great job in terms of really talking about the health. And now we're going to add the mental, because as we all know, if we are stressed, our health goes down significantly, from cortisone to and the impact that has on our body, inflammation, all of these things happen. If we're overstressed, we could talk about Black maternal mortality and the impact.
All of those things. And so the hormone, I mean, just to start a little bit about the hormones. So I'm glad that you said that. So with mental health, we always talk about how we're feeling mentally. I mean, we talk about depression and anxiety, and there's other behavioral health issues too, right? Well, a lot of times we talk about ADHD, and we're really talking about children, but there's adult type ADHD. There's a lot of people, and women are the number one. Women are more likely to have ADHD that's underdiagnosed, because we can still compartment, and we can still we're still task oriented, right, and detail oriented enough that we can still get some things done but still have ADHD. So often women will have adult type ADHD because they're functional but it's just never quite addressed. And it's not until as they get older and the hormones begin to change and they have a hard time with their mental capacity in terms of just keeping things straight and organized, that they find out that they actually have had this ADHD diagnosis, underdiagnosis, or misdiagnosis their entire lives.
Right.
So there's not just a depression and the anxiety, but there's these behavioral things. But what's happening is, with all of these hormones that are raging already as women, and then you get this cortisol, which is this stress hormone that also surges when we're stressed. So many people don't know that a lot of those things are connected with eating disorders, right? They actually create in you the feeling that you're just not satiated, that you just are constantly hungry. It turns on these different hunger hormones. I mean, these hormones turn on sort of enzymes, and you feel hungry all the time. And so now, on top of that, and some people don't get it wrong with depression, there's the extremes. You have those who don't eat at all when they're very depressed, but you also have those who tend to overeat. But then when you're losing estrogen and certain hormones that are sex hormones, they actually cause you to gain weight. And a lot of times cortisol causes you to gain weight. Then the weight gain itself is a source of depression. So you have this sort of cycle that happens in a woman, that as she's getting older and as she's dealing with more and more life crises, it just is what it is. You're dealing with more and more responsibilities. You not only have your children to deal with, but it's possible now that you have your parents that are going to move back in that you're dealing with. So there's all of these things that's happening, and it's just compounded and compounded and compounded. So mental health awareness is so important. And the reason it's a month, and that part I do remember, in 1949 is when we first acknowledged this month. But it was really about not about talking about mental health so that we can remove the stigma from those who are actually experiencing any issues, and then give them the ability to have these conversations, to freely have these conversations, and not feel as though they should be shunned, shut away. You know, for ages in this country, we had asylums, right? You know, these actual buildings where people were locked up and, you know, never to be heard of again. Family members who could tell you, families who could tell you about family members who sort of just kind of went away and weren't heard from again. And that was a really dark time in our history as well. So now we're a lot more open about mental health. And interestingly, this is the time to be open about mental health, because what happened in the pandemic was that while people were isolating, while people were stuck at home, you know, with the lockdown, while people were distancing, while they had to get on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom for school and for work, it was having a huge effect on us. So not only just the isolation itself and the lockdowns, but this communication, this media, this multiple multimedia, these brain waves that we've been really dealing with, not only was that affecting us, but specifically with our youth, social media itself, this is having a profound effect on the mental health of adults and children. And I want to read a little bit, because it was very interesting that what Biden's administration, they actually focused hard on mental health this particular year. And I actually did not know this until I started researching this. And he actually put out a proclamation this year about mental health. And he says that, you know, this was during the State of the Union. He basically said that he had outlined his vision, and had given bolder investments than ever to address our national mental health crisis, and that the strategy that he had put forth included actions that would broaden the pipeline of behavioral health specialists. This is huge, because in our communities, we tend to have a behavioral health or mental health specialist shortage. And so with the Biden administration putting more money into the sourcing, you know, creating more mental health specialists, this should hopefully affect our communities. But we don't just need more of them. We need more that are competent and that are culturally competent, right? Even if you're going to have professionals who may not be Black or brown, then you need those that are culturally competent, that understand how to work in communities of trauma, multi-generational trauma, and understand that because the problem here is our trauma didn't start with the pandemic. Our trauma was exposed by the pandemic, but our trauma started when we stepped on these shores, not as tourists, by the way.
1619. It's funny. It's funny. I would say our trauma was exacerbated by the pandemic. And I would say also what's interesting is, and I know this is a hot political topic, so I don't want to get too political, but in the framing of the whole defund the police campaign, right? When people are saying we need to defund the police, they weren't talking about just taking away monies away from the police altogether. What they were talking about is, why are the police running around our streets with military type equipment, spending millions of dollars on military type equipment, and we're continually to criminalize everyday actions to justify the spending of that money, when we could take that money and invest it into expanding mental health programs, expanding job programs, because criminality is a formula that is lack of opportunity outside of, hey, here's somebody in my neighborhood that I could, hit over the head and rob against.
Lack of opportunity and lack of resources and lack of education, right? And here's the deal. And that lack of education is a minor piece, because many of these folks that are criminals are brilliant. They just don't have the opportunity to apply that brilliance in the right setting. There are CEOs, COOs out in these streets, right? There are marketing geniuses out in these streets, right? And so it's that lack of opportunity and lack of resources. And again, when we're talking about a Biden administration that wants to something like they want to forgive something like $10,000, right, of your student debt, when people are upwards of $100,000 in debt. That doesn't do very much. There are very few people who can get into these secondary schools, into college, to actually have the opportunity and the resources they need to apply a lot of the knowledge they may already have. And so we have to be realistic. But you're right. That defunding was really about reallocating. And I think it should have been said differently. I think that was the whole problem. But a lot of it was for the shock factor, if you will. But to reallocate so that you have mental health specialists that are actually a part of the police force, because every call that comes in 911 doesn't need a police officer with a gun attached to their hip to respond. If it's somebody's family member who's having a mental health crisis, then the police isn't the right person to show up, because all they're going to do is escalate the situation. And that person who has a genuine mental health problem does not see this as a police officer in uniform. It just sees them as someone who's escalating and agitating their situation right now, their mental health situation. And that is where the problems lie. So this is definitely a conversation that, although political and can be political at times, it definitely has a lot to do with the mental health and mental health status of many of the Black and brown individuals that we are talking about when it comes to this nation. But I also wanted to say, so he talked about how, they were growing the behavioral health resources, how that he was going to be putting a lot more money into the growing harms, understanding and addressing the growing harms of digital technology, especially in social media with children. And that was one of the things I talked about. Studies had shown that many of our young girls were having social media is having a huge impact on their self-esteem, their mental health, and increasing depression and anxiety among young girls. Girls as young as 10 and 11 years old were experiencing not just these mental health exacerbations, but were actually having what we call ideations, but beginning to think about suicide and even attempting suicide as a result. So this is horrific. He stated that we must also continue researching not just the impact of social media on mental health of our children, but expand the services to schools to promote the well-being of our children and to set our children up for success so they can thrive as adults. You know, as a pediatrician, this means a whole lot to me. So that's why I'm spending this time telling you about this proclamation. As Biden's administration works to expand suicide prevention and strengthen the crisis care infrastructure, rather, in our communities, they basically are setting it up so that by July, you can actually call a simple 3-digit number. That 3-digit number is going to be 988. This is beginning in July. And it's going to connect you to suicide prevention hotline. So the number now is 1-800-273-TALK, TALK. And what the Biden administration is planning to do is they're connecting that 1-800-273-TALK number to a 3-digit crisis number. 988 is what you'll be able. So just like you can dial 911 and you can get the ambulance, the police, or the fire department in America, you'll be able to dial just 988 and you'll be able to get someone on the line that is going to be a suicide prevention specialist, somebody to talk you through it, somebody, if you're having a crisis, an immediate need, it'll be dealt with. I think this is huge, and I'm so excited and so proud of the Biden administration for taking this step. And so he went on to say that each of us has an important role to play in supporting our fellow Americans who are living with mental health conditions. It's important for us to learn the warning signs. Many of us know that these conversations we've been having, it's because people have attempted or succeeded in a suicide action, and they were right around us in our immediate environment, and we had no idea. So there's so much more information we need to learn. People are talking to us out loud, and we're just not listening. We're not hearing all of it. And I'm not saying that it's our fault, but I'm saying that we just have to get a little bit more sensitive. We have to learn to hear with all of our senses when someone is in crisis and perhaps asking or calling out for help. So I'm going to end with this part where he says, "Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the U.S., hereby proclaim May 2022 as National Mental Health Awareness Month." This is the first time this was done. So he issued a proclamation that May is now National Mental Health Awareness Month. And we've all said it, we've all known it, but now this is recognized by the laws of the land, by the United States Constitution. He says, "I call upon citizens, government agencies, private businesses, nonprofit organizations, and other groups to join me in activities and take action to strengthen the mental health of our communities and of our nation." This is huge. And this was something he said into effect on apparently April 29th of 2022. But I was just so excited when I saw this, and I just wanted to make sure I put that out there. But the fact is that in essence, what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of behavioral health and mental health specialists. That should be a definite positive trickle down into our communities, because again, we're the ones with the shortage in our communities. And he's also committed to finding out what the connections are between things like social media and other outlying, issues and concerns that we have that's affecting not just adults, but the mental health of our children. And then just putting the weight of the White House and the constitution behind this particular stance that he's taken. So I think that is amazing. I think it's awesome. I'm so glad to be here and to sort of and realize that we're finally looking at mental health and seeing it, that it's a huge part of everyday living for so many people. There are people who, just the thought of waking up in the morning, getting themselves together, mustering up the energy to get out or log on and be seen. Sometimes what's happening right now is people are logging on and they keep their screen off, and you have no idea what's going on with them. We don't know. We can hear them. We can hear their voices. We know they're working because work is getting done and they're sending stuff. But it's so much easier for people to be living in depression, living in anxiety, living in these states of confusion and just not well. It's so much easier right now because we don't necessarily have to see each other's faces anymore. When we ask each other how we're doing and how are you today, and just how's the family, I don't know that we're always listening for the answer. I do that a lot. I make sure that when I ask someone something, I'm prepared for a long answer, because if I really didn't want to know, I shouldn't ask, but I'm going to ask because I do want to know. So be prepared. They might not be feeling great when you ask them that question. So be prepared to be the sounding board, to listen, hear what has to be said, and figure out ways that if you can't offer a comforting word, then maybe you have a number for them, or you can connect them to someone, because that's what we need. So Ellis, are you still there? Any thoughts, any words? I just think that it's so important for us to recognize that. And did you put that number up? Because I think that's awesome that in July, they'll be able to just dial 988. I'm so glad that we finally gotten to that point, because suicide is real. And it's shown that sometimes people have that last cry for help. They just want to know that somebody cares. They just want to know that there's somebody's listening. They just want to know that somebody really kind of feels them or knows it or cares that they exist. And so having that hotline, I think is going to be, I don't know, I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be amazing.
I think the bigger issue, as I see it, is you want to be seen, right? And truly seen, not in a way. And so even when we're talking about women, right, and women's health, you want to be seen and appreciated for who you are. And it doesn't mean that because I'm being seen, that doesn't mean I'm somehow better than you. And I think that's where we get into these issues where it's like they want to try to keep certain groups down, keep certain people down, because if they get seen or if they have a voice or a seat at the table, then somehow that's taking away from them. It takes nothing away from anyone to say, hey, I see you and I appreciate you. But you know what it does for that person? It can keep them alive.
Absolutely.
And that's the mindset that that's what we have to recognize when we're talking to our fellow man, right? Like, how would you want to, and I see all these videos out there of people, and we call them Karens and Kens and all this other stuff. And that's really what it is that these people are unhappy. I see a lot of unhappiness. I see a lot of angriness.
Anger, unhappiness. And then the other part of it, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Roe v. Wade, is this desire to control. Like, yes, there's something about needing to control somebody else's stuff that means you're really not in control of your own. Because truth be told, I got enough going on in my own life that the last thing I need to do is be concerned about somebody else's life. Right. And so that's where the whole Karen, Ken, phenomena, for me, that's where my amazement with these people is who has time for that? At what point do you think it is your responsibility to be concerned about what someone else is doing? Means that you obviously don't have a lot happening in your own life, or you're just trying to ignore what's going on over here in your life so that you can just place your attention over here. Because that is a form of, it's pathological, is what it is.
It is, but you got to think about how, the way this country was built is that we had, there was a significant period of time where if anybody of the majority culture stopped a minority and asked them, "What are you doing?" they had to answer.
You had to show your papers.
You had to show your papers, whatever.
You had to answer. And honestly, it became a part of this caste system.
Yes.
They had to ask what you were doing and why. And for whatever reason, that made them feel good. And I do believe that now that system has been removed in such a way that I don't have to show my papers. People are constantly asking, well, do you live here? And prove it. That's a form of asking me to show my papers.
Exactly. When the police stop you and knowing that the law says that they have to have a reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime, not a reasonable suspicion of you. They have to have a reasonable suspicion that you have committed a crime. And they're just stopping you. Why are you here? Let me see your ID. And you have within your lawful right to say no. And then if they get upset, then you say, am I being detained? And if you're being detained, then they have to state a reason as to why they are detaining, which means, and if they don't state that reason, if they start moving around it, your best bet is to walk away and leave, not run away, not just
because then you'll give them probable cause. They can say you were acting suspicious. Right. Now they can say you were, and here's the problem though. They can also say that you were not, what's the words? You were not
compliant with lawful instruction.
With the lawful order of a police officer. Something ridiculous. Right. And this is why I'm saying this stuff it's just so, all of it is so connected. How and the studies have shown just being Black in America is stressful. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
When you're in a car, they've done studies where they'll put monitors on Black men and Black women, and just showing police lights or hearing a siren, how that raises your blood pressure automatically. Because you don't have to be doing something wrong.
No,
you don't have to be doing something wrong. But we all know that those encounters with the police can often not turn out so well, and may not even get you home alive.
Right, and that's anxiety. So so when we're talking about from a health perspective, there is and you can tell me which gland is it? The adrenal gland, right? Mm-hmm. And it sits right on top of your kidneys, right? Am I right about that? Okay, so it sits right on top of the kidneys, and then when you have this situation where it's a stressful situation, it secretes this adrenaline right into your system. Now that's that fight or flight that happens, and that's a good thing when it's a legitimate situation.
And when it's short spurts, small, for the moment.
You're maintaining fight or flight mode all the time. Every time you see a police officer, constantly. Every time you have an encounter,
we're bombarded with this all day.
And that can cause a severe impact on your bodily health. Being in that constant stress mode. We talked about cortisol earlier. Now we're talking about adrenaline. So now we're getting two things that are secreted into our bodies that can be good, but not good.
When they're extreme and prolonged, they're toxic.
They're toxic.
So they are actually good in a spurt, but when it's prolonged, it's toxic. That is just like a piece of candy, a little bit of glucose. That's good for you. That's a little bit of fuel. It can get you going. And it's the constant pouring of sugar into your body that you can't process it well, turns into diabetes. You're blind. You go blind. You lose digits. You have organ failure. All of that stuff can happen because you're constantly taking in something that, if you had a little bit of it, it could be a little bit of energy to your body. If you have too much of it, you're going to be obese, diabetic, with
Chronic kidney disease is
chronic
the number
kidney,
one.
all of that.
The number one, they said, I was learning this past week. The number one indicator for chronic kidney disease is diabetes. The group that has the most cases of diabetes per capita is Black people. So you draw that straight line from diabetes to chronic kidney disease, and chronic kidney disease can lead to having to be on dialysis.
And I have conversations about this. What used to be talked about was just diet and exercise. Right. We cannot put it on just diet and exercise for Black folks. That is not the case.
Yep.
You are literally ignoring all of the systemic causes of the physiological changes that are associated with stress. Yep. All of the microaggressions and the biases, all of the things so the adrenaline and the cortisol that's really connected to a lot of the experiences I'm having just being Black or being a Black woman in America. And I have had this conversation. And one of the things I'm going to bring it back to is some of the solutions. For instance, meditation. Yeah. I am a huge meditator, and I talk so much about transcendental meditation, particularly because it is the one immediate intervention that addresses a lot of these physiological harms that we have from these microaggressions and biases that we feel. All of that cortisol is that. So transcendental meditation particularly, and probably other mindfulness activities do as well, but I know this is the evidence-based information that I have, is that it actually lowers cortisol. Mm-hmm. It lowers stress and anxiety. Right. It actually, another thing that cortisol does is 3 particular systems that cortisol affects. It affects your cardiovascular system, and that it actually causes the constriction of blood vessels and increases your blood pressure. Mm-hmm. This is the cortisol. This is the stress hormone. It affects your digestive system because it actually causes you to have decreased digestion. That's what fight or flight is for. When you're in the middle of fight or flight and you cannot digest your food, you're not supposed to digest your food. You're not even supposed to eat. You're supposed to be running. So right. It has this in it. It's so this indirect effect. But once you stop and you get out of that, you should be able to eat and digest your food. But when you never stop fighting or flighting because you have that hormone in, you're not digesting your food properly, which is leading to obesity.
Yep.
Then you have your liver. Your liver is not processing glucose correctly. Now, again, in fight or flight, you don't need to process that glucose. You're not supposed to. You're supposed to utilize it for the energy. But when you're resting, you're actually supposed to convert it into something called glucagon, right? And that's actually going to help you manage your glucose levels. But because you never do, it continues to go up and go up and go up. And that is actually associated with diabetes. So here we are in these Black and brown communities with all of this stress and stress hormones that are associated with this fight or flight syndrome. And we have our livers being attacked and inundated with this hormone. So it's being attacked. We have our digestive system being disrupted, and we have our blood pressure going up because our vessels are constricted. And all people want to say is, well, if those Black and brown people would eat right, and if they would just exercise, then they wouldn't be in this predicament. And you're like, no. This is
one more added thing, and then we're going to go to the playing for keeps. You're playing for your cards. Is that, how does that manifest? How does that mental stress? We just talked about, you did a great job of pointing out how it impacts our individual health. But how does it impact our relationship health, right? So that person that is stressed, now as a Black person, you can't take your stress out on your boss. You can't take that stress out on the police officer. So what happens is you come home and you take it out on your spouse. And so we've had, especially during the pandemic, we have had higher rates of domestic abuse. We have had higher rates of child abuse. We have higher rates of substance abuse. All of these things trying to combat the elevated stress levels that we're already fighting, and now we end up taking that out on other people. We externalize that internal stress. We externalize it by becoming abusive to not only to other people but to ourselves by using substances.
But I will actually, on top of that, I'm going to beg to differ a little, because we do take it out. We try not to, but it does take, we do end up sitting somehow. There's a little bit of it that we take out at work. And so now we're the coworker or the employee that's disgruntled or mean on what, you know what I mean? Like, that's the problem. So some people can truly not take it out, but some people do. And then they're the angry person at work, right? They're the one that never wants to get along. They're the one who always when the problem is they really are having their issues that they're dealing with that nobody wants to deal with. So they're the ones who try to suggest things at work and it gets shot down, but then they don't have the greatest disposition at work. Or that's
their ideas get shot down, but then it pops up 2 weeks later.
And somebody else
got credit for it. Okay, we laughing, but you know,
the police officer who may just be pulling you over, but you know what? This was the wrong time, the wrong day. And I'm tired, and you say something that you think should be perfectly understandable, and you get immediately, assaulted for it. So my point is, that's the issue, is you're expected to not take it out on anybody because you're the black man or the black woman in society wants you to behave all the time. Right. And when you don't, then somehow you're considered angry all the time, or you're considered aggressive or too aggressive, and all of these things that get attached and assigned to us that really are not fair, because that white woman that's aggressive is assertive. Right. That and is shrewd and knows how to take care of business, but that black woman is a whole nother set of words that are used.
Whole nother set of words, right? And and I had a police officer and I had a lawyer tell me this. It's funny. It's we talked about that anxiety that goes over just by seeing police lights, right? So think about this: you get pulled over, what happens? Your heart rate goes up. You might start to sweat a little bit. Your skin, the color comes out of your face. But what does that officer see? Oh, this person's sweating.
You look suspicious.
Suspicious. So now I got to check the car because no, it's just your presence.
I'm stuttering. My mouth is dry. I don't even want you in my presence. I'm a black woman, right, with nothing to hide. 3 kids working and I'm a pediatrician. I cannot stand to be pulled up because now I'm like, what's going to happen? Right. And again, you have nothing to hide, but you have everything to fear, unfortunately, because you may not get home. Yeah. And that is the problem. You're exactly right. I can't change the physiological effects that my fear of you and your uniform and your lights and the embarrassment of pulled over and people's eyes on me. All of that stuff it culminates together for me to feel like, oh my God, am I going to get out of this alive? Right. And so it does have. So I mean, this is a great conversation because
we need to have this conversation again because we could talk about how we can incorporate. Because this is another thing that the attorney mentioned when I said, well, okay, well, how do we deal with that? Just in that context, and say so this is a moment where that a 10 to 15 second meditation break in that moment while you're waiting for him to get out of that car. Close your eyes, slow your breathing down, concentrate. Those type of things will help lower that heart rate, make you appear more calm to where that officer is not reading something that's not even there. Right. It's just your personal anxiety about him because we've seen the story. We know about Philando Castile and Michael Brown and what was your boy in New York that got choked up for having loose cigarettes and the list goes on and on. We know about all of those people.
What's his name? Michael Garner, maybe?
Eric Michael Garner.
Eric Garner or something.
Eric Garner. So we know about all of those folks, right? We know about Botham Jean just sitting in his apartment. We know about these folks, right? Even and they're still happening. So, hey, if I get pulled over, that reality is I might not live through this. Right. And that is a real and to try to dismiss it is really doing the folks a disservice. So I know you've got a great set of cards for us this month.
I was trying to remember the thing I did last time. The acronym where you stop, you breathe. Oh man, I'll bring it up next time when we talk about
sober.
Sober. That's
Yep.
right. Sober.
Yep.
That's 5 seconds to do those 5 things where you stop, you observe, you breathe. Yeah, all of that.
Yep.
And that is so, and then you respond. That way you don't react. And
Right.
it's so poignant in what you talk about.
Yeah, I think it stands for stop, observe, breathe, evaluate, and respond.
And then respond. Yep, that's exactly what it. That's exactly what. And again, because I do recovery, addiction medicine as well. That's actually where I learned that, and I thought this is so great because everybody needs to know this.
Yep.
So I'm so glad y'all were here. I'm so glad we got to share. Again, make sure you share this with your friends. Tell them all about the show, Mind, Body, and Stress with Dr. Yolanda. And I always end with a few things that I want you to do this month, right? So I put these cards together. Dr. Yolanda's playing for keeps. And it's 4 things that I want you to do this month. And I'm going to start off with, and they all have to do with either something spiritual or something that's self-care or intellectual, what have you. So I'm going to start off with my clubs, which usually has to do with intellectual things. But this month, I want you to, in one of the weeks, I want you to start or join a book club that week. And real quickly, Dr. Michael Roizen, according to him, building brain power and making social connection is both of those things are good for you because it delivers a double dose of I feel happy and I feel healthy. So therefore, by being in a club, which is the connection, and by reading and expanding your mind, you're actually doing both all at the same time. Okay. I won't read that whole card. I want you to start a good book this week and share it with your friends. All right. The next tip is going to be, I want you to take a day trip sometime this week to connect with nature. So through compassion, forgiveness, kindness, love, and overall concern for all life forms, we become spiritual beings. Therefore, to accomplish this goal, it requires mindfulness. This means being mindful of our environment, of the people that are surrounding us, and how we are feeling positively or negatively, and how that affects us and how that affects them. So ultimately, this is how we are also mindful of ourselves. Taking time to connect with nature around us can help us keep these goals in mind. Okay. Real quickly, if you, one of the studies in a journal said that 95% of those who are interviewed said that their mood improved after spending time outside, changing from a depressed, stressed, or anxious moment to a more calm and balanced state. So again, spend some time outside, take a day trip and do that. Now for my Jack of Spades. I want you, this is so important, especially all you mommies out there. Happy Mother's Day, by the way. Say no. N-O. It's a big word. Actually, it's a small word with big impact. Say no to a request that has come from someone asking you to add a task or an activity to your already busy schedule 1 week out of this month. It is so hard for us to say no, ladies. I am here to tell you. Every time I get asked something, I have to evaluate the answer. And it's so funny because people will look at me and say, well, is it yes or is it no? And I have to tell them, I'm really thinking about it. I need to know, not just, is this good for me? Like, I don't need to be opportunistic in that way. Like, I don't need to see the opportunity in it for me, but I need to make sure that it's actually good for me, right? Or at least not detrimental. But this month, I want you to actively think about saying no to something that's going to add added stress to an already stressed out or over scheduled week that you might be having. Okay, whenever you have a great deal on your plate, saying no to others' requests is the best way to secure your own emotional well-being. And it is a step toward taking care of yourself. This is a self-care activity. So when you say no to somebody and they say, well, how dare you? You say, well, Dr. Yolanda said, as a self-care activity this month, I was going to have to choose something to say no to. And this is the thing. All right. Saying no is also very courageous, and it lets others know that you value yourself. At first, it may be difficult to speak up for yourself and to shut others off, but in time, I promise you, it's going to get easier to say no. So start somewhere. And last but not least, I want you to sit down and find a health and wellness retreat. Find it this week. Now, figure out what it is. It doesn't have to be in this month. I need you to identify it this month and then pay your deposit as a commitment to yourself. I am not endorsing any particular one. I will say that I personally am going to be going on one in September. And I'm going to give details about it later because I don't want it to be connected to this, like, oh, I want you to do this retreat. And by the way, come in September. That's not what I'm going to do on this show. I'm not using this show for those means. However, I will be going somewhere in September. And I'm going away, and it's in Bali. And I actually have to pay as well. I'm going to participate. I'm going to give some services, but I'm also paying money to go because it's a commitment to myself. And it's actually, I'm going away. It's in Bali, and it's a self-care retreat. It's going to have yoga and food and I mean, good, healthy food, and just a lot of opportunities to really self-care and reflect. And all I'm saying is find something. Go somewhere online, find something that works for you. If it's only a day or two, that's fine. I'm going for an entire week. Everybody can't do that. But booking a wellness retreat should feel a bit like picking out your own birthday gift. You get to dig deep. You get to look at all the parts of yourself. And these are the parts that need attention, love, and healing. And then do whatever you need to do, but book that wellness retreat so that you can tend to those parts. Don't think for a second that this is some sort of indulgence, because it isn't. This is necessary. Self-care is an important part of wellness, just as food is, as sleep, shelter, and exercise. The problem is that you're probably so busy being an amazing employee, an amazing attentive mom, a loving, adoring spouse, and a loyal sibling or friend that you're not spending the time that you need being amazing, attentive, loving, adoring, and loyal to you. So I want you to find something and put your money down and work toward it, even if it's toward the end of the year. But I promise you, you will not regret it. So I am so excited that this ends our time. Not that my time is ended, but that I've had this time with you today. And please do not forget to tell your friends about it. Let us know where you came in from, and be ready to join us in June on the 3rd, June 3rd, the first Friday of every month. I'm here. So June 3rd, we're going to talk about it. And you should know it's Men's Health Awareness Month. Of course, right? It's going to be Father's Day next month. And so shout out, happy Father's Day to all those amazing, brilliant, talented men out there. But we're going to talk about some things that men's health, that's very vital to men's health. And then maybe even a little bit more about the mental health of our men, because a lot of times we don't talk about it and we don't make that connection. And just simply having this conversation today with Ellis about just how we respond to things like, flashing lights and police officers and authority. It's not the same for Black men as it is for Black women. It's a lot different. And it's something that we should talk about and we can talk about. All right. So thank you guys for joining today. I'm so excited that you were here. Great questions. Please continue to ask us questions so we can answer them. But today, again, I just want to say happy pre-Mother's Day to all of you out there who are mothers. Those of you who are participated in someone's life, just giving maternal advice and maternal care, you too are celebrated on this day. All right. Enjoy, and thank you guys for joining. I will see you next month, June 3rd, back here with Mind, Body, and Stress with Dr. Yolanda.